My son Daniel had always been a good boy. Quiet, kind, and a little too easily swayed by the people he loved. When he married Vanessa, I told myself that was just part of his charm. She was loud and beautiful, a woman who took up all the oxygen in a room, and I thought maybe that was what he needed, a strong anchor. I'd always been the quiet one, the invisible one, the woman who made things happen in the background. For years, that had been my role, especially at Christmas. I remember the way Vanessa's smile tightened when I protested. It wasn't a smile of kindness, but one of pure satisfaction, as if she had just won a game I didn't even know we were playing. "Oh, it fits you perfectly," she said, not even bothering to look up from her phone. "You've got nothing else to do." The words hit me not as a suggestion, but as an indictment. For years, I had poured my heart into every holiday. Every Christmas, I cooked, I cleaned, I hosted. Daniel and Vanessa would breeze in with a store-bought dessert and an armful of gifts, and they'd bask in the glow of a perfect day that I had created. This year, Vanessa hadn't even bothered to ask. She had simply assigned me the task of preparing a full Christmas feast for 25 guests, a guest list that included all of her friends and extended family I'd barely met. And Daniel, my own son, the boy I had raised with every ounce of love in my heart, said nothing. He just sat there, eyes glued to the television, silently agreeing. At that moment, I realized I wasn't family. I was an unpaid help. You'd think the truth would be a loud, shattering sound, like glass breaking. But for me, it was a quiet click, like a lock finally turning on a door I had been trying to get through for years. It was the moment I realized that their love wasn't unconditional. It was conditional on my service, my silence, my willingness to be a doormat. That's when I remembered my late husband, Thomas. He was a man of quiet strength. We met in college, two introverts who found solace in each other's presence. He'd often tell me, "Margaret, your strength isn't in how loud you can be, but in how firm you can stand." He always saw me, even when others didn't. Thomas was the kind of man who would surprise me with a single flower or leave a note on the kitchen counter just to tell me he loved me. He saw my sacrifices and honored them. When he passed, a piece of me went with him, and I think that's when my silence became a habit. I told myself it was for the sake of peace, for the sake of Daniel's happiness. But the truth is, I was afraid of making waves, of losing the only family I had left. Thelma, in the knowledge base, felt the same way, like her presence was only functional and not welcome. I had let myself become a background character in my own story. After that conversation with Vanessa, I went to my room. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat on the edge of my bed and looked around. The house wasn't mine. It was theirs. I had given up my little cottage after Thomas passed, the place filled with our memories, to be closer to them. At the time, Daniel had told me it would be good for everyone. He said they had plenty of room. I wanted to believe him. I wanted my family to fill the empty space in my heart. I moved in, and for the first few years, it felt like I was needed. I helped unpack, cooked, and watched the grandkids. But over time, the helping turned into an expectation, just like it did for Marianne. The small requests turned into silent demands. I was the person who bought groceries, paid for school supplies, and slipped them cash for bills without a word of thanks. I'd made a small nest egg for myself, a little cushion to carry me through my later years. But that money had been flowing into their lives as quietly as the water running through their pipes. I was so afraid of being alone, so desperate to be useful, that I didn't see the silent exploitation happening. I was convinced that mothers just keep giving no matter what. That night, instead of making grocery lists and stressing, something changed in me. The quiet in my room no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like peace. I thought of Thomas again. I could almost hear his voice, as clear as a bell. Margaret, don't let anyone back you into a corner you don't belong in. It was time to stand tall. I opened my laptop and quietly booked a plane ticket to a small cabin retreat upstate. It was a place I had always dreamed of visiting but never made the time for. It was a place for me, and for the first time in a very long time that felt right. The act was a quiet rebellion. My sweetest revenge wasn't in shouting or arguing. It was in reclaiming my freedom and my self-worth. On Christmas morning, I packed a small bag. As I quietly rolled my suitcase behind me, I felt lighter than I had in years. The house was already bustling with the beginnings of chaos. Vanessa was running around in a panic, on the phone with a caterer who had canceled, shouting about a grand feast she had bragged about to everyone. Daniel, predictably, was nowhere to be found. As I walked out the front door and stepped into the cool, sharp air, I knew this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of me finally standing tall. The little cabin I'd rented was everything I had hoped for. Tucked away in a blanket of snow, it smelled of pine and wood smoke. As I stepped inside, the silence felt so profound it was almost deafening. It wasn't the empty, hollow silence of my son's house, where my presence was just a piece of furniture they had grown used to. This was a silence filled with possibility. On Christmas morning, I woke to the gentle crackle of a fire. No one was demanding a ham be glazed. No one was complaining about a gift. The only sound was the bubbling of hot cocoa on the stove. I sat on the plush armchair by the window, watching snowflakes drift down, and for the first time in years, I truly felt the holiday spirit. This was my Christmas, my peace, my quiet rebellion. Meanwhile, I imagined the scene back at Daniel's house. I could almost hear the frantic phone calls, the growing panic in Vanessa's voice. She had planned this grand feast as a show of her perfect life, a way to prove she had it all: the husband, the house, and the quiet, accommodating mother-in-law to do all the work. She had bragged about it to her friends, her extended family, and everyone who would listen. Her pride was her downfall. I knew that without my help, the feast was doomed. It wasn't about the food. It was about the humiliation she would face when she couldn't deliver on her promises. Back in my own world, I spent the day reading a book I'd been meaning to get to for months. I took a long, hot bath. I cooked a simple meal for myself, a grilled cheese and a bowl of tomato soup, and it tasted better than any elaborate feast I had ever prepared for them. The absence of obligation was a flavor all its own. My phone, which I had muted, finally started buzzing. First it was Vanessa, a text message demanding to know where I was and what I was doing. Then a call. I didn't answer. It felt wrong, but I knew that this was a moment for myself. Then came Daniel's frantic call. His voice was laced with a tone I hadn't heard in a long time. Panic, but also a hint of something else, something I couldn't quite place. He wanted to know why I had abandoned them, why I wasn't there to help. "Where are you, Mom? The house is a mess. Vanessa is losing it." "What are we going to do?" he asked, his voice strained. I thought about his voice, the way it had been just a few days ago, cold and indifferent. I thought about all the times I had bailed him out, paid his bills, and silently picked up the pieces. I took a deep breath. "Daniel," I said, my voice calm, "I am where I am supposed to be. Christmas is about love, not servitude. I've spent years being your doormat. I am done. I'm not coming back to clean up your mess." The line went silent. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of liberation. I had finally said the words I had been too afraid to utter for years. When I returned home 2 days later, the house was a disaster. Crumbs were on the counter. Dirty dishes filled the sink. The Christmas tree was still up, but the lights were dark, as if even it had given up the ghost. Vanessa sat on the couch, her face pale, her beautiful clothes rumpled. She looked defeated. Daniel stood in the doorway, his shoulders slumped. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just walked through the wreckage with a small, knowing smile on my face. I looked at Daniel and Vanessa. They had never seen me like this before, calm, confident, and utterly unbothered. I hope you both learned something this year, I said softly, my voice firm. Christmas is a time for family, for love, for peace. It's not about using people to make yourself look good. You don't get to take and expect a person to keep giving. I could see the shame on Daniel's face. He knew I was right. Vanessa, on the other hand, was too proud to admit it. She looked at me with a mix of fury and resentment. She was used to getting her way, and for the first time, she hadn't. It was the quietest, most powerful revenge I could have ever taken. I looked around at the chaos. This mess was not mine to clean up. I was a person, not a maid. I had reclaimed my dignity and my self-worth. It was the first step on a long road to freedom, and I couldn't wait to see where it would lead me. The silence in the days that followed Christmas was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Daniel and Vanessa were civil, almost eerily so, but there was a new tension in the air. The unspoken words hung between us like a thick fog. They were a family of 3 now, Daniel, Vanessa, and their 2 children, and I was just a ghost in their house, a woman who had once been a mother and was now just a resident. I began to make small changes. I started taking long walks in the mornings, just like the narrator in the knowledge base who signed up for a seniors hiking group. I found a local bookstore where I could sit and read for hours. I started eating my meals in my room, not out of spite, but because I no longer wanted to share a table with people who saw me as an obligation. It was a new kind of freedom, one that felt both liberating and a little bit lonely. One evening, Daniel knocked on my door. He looked tired, his shoulders still slumped. "Mom," he said, "can we talk?" I opened the door and gestured for him to come in. He sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed I had sat on when I booked my ticket to freedom. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I should have stood up for you." His words felt hollow, like an apology he had rehearsed but didn't truly understand. I looked at him, my heart aching for the boy he used to be, the one who would bring me dandelions he picked from the yard, who would comfort me after a long day. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who had chosen a life of quiet indifference. "I know," I said, my voice soft but firm. "But it's not just about Christmas, Daniel. It's about everything. It's about the fact that you and Vanessa have been using me as an ATM, as an unpaid nanny, as a maid. It's about the fact that you let her humiliate me in my own home, the home that I gave to you, and said nothing." The last part was a quiet lie. This was their home, not mine. I had given it all up to be with them. He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "We didn't mean to," he mumbled. "But you did," I said, cutting him off. "You may not have intended to, but your actions or inactions did exactly that. I gave you my savings to help with your mortgage, a down payment on a house, and to pay for the kids' school. I watched your children when you went on vacation. I cooked, I cleaned, I sacrificed. And for what? For a life where I'm invisible." I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, not of sadness, but of a quiet rage that had been simmering for years. The words tumbled out of me, a flood of emotion I had been holding back for too long. I told him about all the times I had wanted to speak up, but didn't. About the time Vanessa insisted I give up my favorite armchair because it clashed with the decor, and the time she threw away a sentimental vase because she thought it was old-fashioned. I had let it all go, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. But now I knew it was. It was worth every fight. "You've taken my kindness for weakness," I told him, and you have let your wife do the same." Daniel just sat there, silent, his face pale. It was clear he had never seen me like this before. The quiet backbone of the family was finally cracking, and he didn't know what to do. I was no longer the invisible mother, the doormat he had come to expect. I was a woman, and I was finally standing up for herself. "This can't continue," I said, a wave of resolve washing over me. "Something has to change." He nodded. "I know. What do you want us to do?" I looked at him, and a new plan began to form in my mind, one that was not about revenge, but about my own liberation. "I've been thinking," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I need to get my own place. I need my own space." His eyes widened in surprise. "Mom, you can't be serious. Where would you go? How would you manage?" The questions were not of concern, but of panic. The silent ATM was threatening to close. I smiled a small, powerful smile. "Oh, I'll manage," I said. "And as for where I'll go, I have some money set aside. I will find a place. And I'm getting a job." I could see the shock on his face. He had always seen me as his to take care of, not a woman who could take care of herself. But that's exactly what I was going to do. The day after I told Daniel I was leaving, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It was no longer filled with quiet resentment, but with a palpable sense of panic. Daniel and Vanessa were like two pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit. They whispered in the kitchen, their voices low and frantic, and I knew they were talking about me. The silent ATM was threatening to close, and they were scrambling to find a new source of funds. I didn't let their panic deter me. Instead, I began to plan. I spent my days at the local library, a place I had always loved but had rarely made time for. I researched apartments, looked for job openings, and read books on financial independence. I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. It was as if I had been sleepwalking through life and had finally woken up. One afternoon, as I was leaving the library, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. It was a woman with a kind voice, the director of a small nonprofit organization that helped women re-enter the workforce. I had sent them my resume a few days before, half expecting to be ignored. But she had seen my experience as a bookkeeper and had been impressed. She offered me a part-time position. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough to get me started. It was enough to prove to myself and to them that I could do it. I accepted the offer on the spot, my heart soaring with a feeling of quiet triumph. When I got home, I found Vanessa sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red-rimmed. She had been crying. She saw me, and her facade of composure crumbled. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "You're just going to abandon us? After all we've done for you?" Her words were a punch to the gut. I looked at her, at the beautiful house I had helped them pay for, the expensive clothes she wore, the life she had built on my back. "Vanessa," I said, my voice calm and steady, "you have done nothing for me. I have done everything for you. And now, I am doing something for myself." Her tears turned to a flash of anger. "You're being selfish. This is family. Family is not a one-way street," I said, the words coming easily now. "Family is about love and respect. It's not about using people." She had no words in response. The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I walked past her and up the stairs, feeling lighter than I had in years. I had faced her, and I hadn't backed down. I had stood my ground, not with anger, but with the quiet resolve of a woman who had finally had enough. That night, I started to pack my things. It was a strange feeling, going through my belongings. There wasn't much that was truly mine. The furniture belonged to them, the decorations, even the plates in the kitchen. But the few boxes of books, the old photographs of me and Thomas, the quilt my grandmother had made, these were the things that held my story. As I packed, I realized that I wasn't just leaving a house. I was reclaiming my identity. The next morning, I called a moving company. I planned it for a week later, a day when I knew Daniel and Vanessa would be out of the house. I wanted it to be quiet. I didn't want a big confrontation, a dramatic scene. My revenge wasn't loud. It was in my silence. It was in the simple act of walking away, of reclaiming my life, while they were left to deal with the consequences of their actions. A week later, the day of the move, I was up early. I had a cup of coffee and watched the sunrise. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a very long time. The movers arrived, and I directed them to my few boxes. It didn't take long. Soon, the room was empty. I walked around the space one last time. It was just a room, but for a few years it had been my world. Now, my world was about to get much bigger. I left a note on the kitchen counter for Daniel. It was short and to the point. Daniel, I've moved out. I'm going to be fine. I hope you and Vanessa find a way to work things out.
Love, Mom.
I walked out the door, a small bag in my hand, and a new life waiting for me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I was finally free. I arrived at my new apartment with a sense of quiet triumph. It was small, a one-bedroom on the top floor of a cozy building with a little balcony that looked out over a bustling city park. It wasn't a house, but it was mine. I could put my books on the shelves, hang my pictures on the walls, and sit in my own space without the fear of being told I was in the way. It was a new kind of freedom, one that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I spent the next few weeks unpacking, not just my boxes, but the parts of myself I had packed away years ago. I rediscovered my love for painting and set up a small easel in the corner of my living room. I started a small garden on my balcony, a few pots of herbs, and a small tomato plant. I started working at the nonprofit, helping other women who were trying to find their footing again. The work was fulfilling, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was contributing to something meaningful. Meanwhile, the calls from Daniel and Vanessa grew more frantic. They had realized that the quiet woman they had taken for granted was gone. The bills were piling up. The children needed to be taken to school. The house was a mess. They had no one to turn to. One afternoon, Daniel called me. His voice was laced with a desperation I had never heard before. "Mom," he said, "I don't know what to do. The mortgage is due, and we don't have enough money. Can you please help us?" I felt a pang of sadness. My son, the boy I had raised with every ounce of love in my heart, was calling me, not to apologize, not to talk, but to ask for money. He had learned nothing. "Daniel," I said, my voice steady, "I can't. I'm sorry." He was silent for a moment, and I could hear Vanessa in the background, her voice a high-pitched whisper. "Just tell her you're sorry. Tell her you need her." "Mom, please," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry for everything. Just help us this one last time." I took a deep breath. "Daniel," I said, "my help is no longer for sale. I love you, but I can't keep bailing you out. You and Vanessa need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet." I could hear the frustration in his voice, but I held my ground. This wasn't about being cruel. This was about love. I was teaching him the most valuable lesson of all, that he was capable of taking care of himself. It was a lesson my late husband, Thomas, had always taught me. I was not doing this out of revenge, but out of a deep and abiding love for my son. I was finally giving him the gift of his own strength. The call ended with a quiet click. I sat for a moment, my heart heavy. But then I looked around my little apartment, my new life. I had reclaimed my freedom, my dignity, and my self-worth. My sweetest revenge wasn't in seeing them fail, but in proving to myself that I could succeed. The silence that followed my last call with Daniel was a gift. It was the space I had needed for years, the chance to finally hear my own thoughts, my own needs, and my own voice. In the weeks that followed, I stopped checking my phone for their calls. I focused on my new life, on my new job, and on the small pleasures that filled my days. My job at the nonprofit was a revelation. I was helping other women who were starting over, just like me. Some were recovering from divorce, some from job loss, and some from years of being taken for granted by their families. I was able to use my skills as a bookkeeper to help them budget, to find jobs, and to build a new sense of independence. It was a purpose I had never known I was missing. One evening, I received an email from a new friend, a woman named Emily I had met at the nonprofit. She was a fellow widow, and we had bonded over coffee and conversations about our pasts. The email was a simple invitation to join her and a few other women for a dinner party at her house. The thought of it filled me with both excitement and a little bit of fear. For so long, my social life had revolved around my family. But I knew this was a step I had to take. When I arrived at Emily's house, I was met with warmth and laughter. There was no pretense, no obligation, and no silent expectations. We talked about everything, our struggles, our dreams, and the quiet triumphs that had led us to this moment. I told them about Daniel and Vanessa, about the Christmas feast ultimatum, and about the quiet rebellion that had led me to this new life. They listened with empathy, sharing their own stories of resilience and courage. That night, as I drove home, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had a community. I had a purpose. I had a life that was finally my own. I had chosen it, not out of spite or anger, but out of a deep and abiding love for myself. A few months later, I received a package in the mail. It was a large, flat box, and inside was a beautiful oil painting of a woman sitting on a park bench, her face serene, a book in her hands. The painting was of me. Tucked inside was a card from Daniel and Vanessa. It was a simple card, but the words were the most meaningful they had ever written to me.
Mom,
We wanted to give you this. It's a painting of you from a photo we saw on social media. We hope you like it. We also wanted to say thank you. Thank you for showing us what real strength is. We're working on things. We're getting a financial advisor, and Vanessa got a part-time job. We're learning to stand on our own. It's not easy, but it's a start. We miss you. We love you. Daniel and Vanessa. I sat on my couch and stared at the painting for a long time. It was a silent apology, a quiet admission of their mistakes, and a sign that they had finally started to understand. My revenge wasn't in seeing them fail. It was in watching them grow. It was in seeing them take responsibility for their own lives. The following Sunday, Daniel called me. He wasn't asking for money or for help. He was calling to tell me about a new job he had started, a job that he was passionate about, not just one that paid the bills. He told me about how he was taking the kids to the park on his own, and how he and Vanessa were finally learning to communicate. I listened, my heart swelling with pride. "I'm proud of you, Daniel," I said, and I meant it. I always knew you could do it. I was finally learning what it felt like to be valued for who I was, not what I could provide. And that was worth more than all the money I had ever given away. The sweetest revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting better. It's about building a life so full of peace and purpose that you don't have time to worry about the people who tried to dim your light. It's about choosing yourself, and in doing so, giving others the chance to choose themselves too. It's about reclaiming your dignity, your self-worth, and your voice. If this story spoke to you, please like, share, and subscribe to her stories with Maya so more women can hear this message. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my shoes?